Okay, well, it's a smaller group today, but that's all right. Sometimes these smaller, more intimate sessions are really great overall for everyone. So, welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for joining. So, we're here for the first part of a two-part workshop on gender equality in capital markets. And as we start, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. It's always nice to get to know who we're chatting with today. So we do have a packed schedule, so we're going to get started, and maybe some more folks will join, and we'll make sure you have resources as we go throughout the discussion today. But to start off, we want to say a big thank you to SIX Swiss Exchange for hosting today. It's a really collaborative effort. We developed the training with IFC, UN Women, University of Columbia, with support from the Luxembourg government, and it's all made possible by our host. So with no further ado, please welcome from Swiss Exchange, Vera Gutinger, Head of Issuer Relations, and thank you for taking the time, Vera. I'll turn it over to you for some opening remarks.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon also, everyone from my side. I'm delighted to welcome you today on behalf of SIX Swiss Exchange for this workshop on gender equality in capital markets. My name is Vera, and I'm responsible for issuer relations at SIX Swiss Exchange. That means I am responsible for the listed companies and to support them. Thanks to our collaboration with the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, we are able to offer this workshop to you. And at SIX, we are committed to support our listed companies with their sustainability initiatives, and therefore we are also hosting this workshop. This training program will guide you through the complexities of gender equality in capital markets. You will build awareness of sustainable finance through understanding the financial implications of gender inequality, improving corporate reporting and literacy on gender equality, and identifying market opportunities that these improvements afford. So with this, I thank again the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative for making this training possible, and hand back again to Landon.
Great. Thank you so much, Vera. Thanks for your time and being here with us today. So we'll move right along, and today's training we're looking at the interface of gender equality and global markets. So as many of you may already feel, gender equality and finance can be both a sensitive as well as complex topic. So rather than pretending that complexity does not exist, what we aim to do is better understand it and identify means of moving forward. So today's session looks particularly at understanding these complexities. And then on the 30th of October, we'll get more into the action-orientated mechanisms for advancing gender equality and addressing these complexities. So just a few housekeeping items as we get started. So it is a two-part course. The next part is on the following Wednesday, the 30th. It's a live facilitation for 2 hours, so I'll introduce some colleagues and partners shortly. And it's live Q&A with chat and some activities. As mentioned, it's a smaller session today, so we really encourage you to participate and ask questions. And with that participation, we do some mentees, which if you haven't used before, it's straightforward to ask some questions and do some polls. And we also do Zoom polls. So yeah, I really encourage you to participate as much as possible, especially given our smaller group size today, to make it a little more interactive for everyone. And then at the end of next session, there will be certification. So you'll complete a feedback survey at the end of the second session, and then you'll receive your CDP certified certificate in about 1 week. But you do have to attend both sessions for that certificate. Other housekeeping, participants are on mute, but please use the chat comments and any discussion with other participants, as well as the Q&A for any questions. If you do have questions, please use that Q&A function. It helps us monitor things and track things a bit easier than asking questions in the chat. These can be anonymous as well, and we have some great expertise on the call as well. With that, some of the expertise we have. So we have myself, project officer here with UNSSE, and I'm also joined by my colleague Fiona, a training officer here today as well. We're also joined by Maya from UN Women, who works at the UN Women's Empowerment Principles Secretariat, where she focuses on promoting gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and community. Before this role, Maya also contributed to the humanitarian section, as well as having worked with UN Women in Georgia, focused on UN women's economic empowerment across the South, including work related to the WEPs. And has also served as a gender specialist with the UNDP in Uzbekistan, focus on gender mainstreaming across the organization with a master's degree in gender studies from Stockholm University. So we're very pleased to be joined and have Maya's expertise here with us today. So thank you so much, Maya.
Thank you so much.
We also, thank you. We also have Harry joining us from Bloomberg, who will join shortly as well. He's an ESG specialist with Bloomberg, working on the team responsible for the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. And prior to this, he also worked in the impact investment space as an analyst. So thank you to all of those speakers as well, to Vera, who helped kick things off. Now, gender equality is a very complex topic, and it should be seen as such. If you think it's quite simple, you maybe have not thought enough about it quite yet. However, to help us guide us through this complexity, we've broken this training program into 4 clear steps that both individuals and organizations can use as they address the complexity and consider how to enhance gender equity in their operations and processes. So part 1 looks at the first 2 steps, preparation and alignment. And in these first 2 steps, we're focusing on what gender equality is, why it's important, and provide an overview of the main standards and guidelines that can guide performance on this topic. And with part 2, we'll dig into the action with the second 2 steps that you see on your screen, which are implementation and communication. But as mentioned, that will be on the 30th. Now, briefly, an overview of the full training program. So the training program we're introducing today has 4 modules, which have been developed to walk you through the 4 steps for improving gender equality performance in markets. And today we'll be focusing on the first 2 steps, which are prepare and align. And in our next session together, the second half of the training, we'll focus on the communicate and implement. So it's important to note that this is an ongoing process. So once you've started communicating on your gender equality performance, it doesn't mean that you're done. This, like many other sustainability related topics, is a constant process of improvement and refinement. And while we present these steps in order, in reality, it's likely you'll be working on all 4 steps together or in unison at different times. Now, in these 2 sessions, we have 2 big learning objectives. So the first is understanding why action is needed for enhanced gender equality. And the second is identifying what tools can be used to enhance gender equality. And I'll briefly touch on the agenda for the next 2 hours of our time together. So part 1 will be understanding complexities through preparation and alignment. And the first 15 minutes will be an introduction. The 45 minutes following will be step 1, prepare on the gender finance connection. We'll give you a short break, stretch your legs or grab a tea before kicking off the second part, or the second step, which is step 2, align on gender lens frameworks. And then we'll take a few minutes to wrap up and perhaps answer any questions you may have. Now, at this time, we always like to see how comfortable folks are with this topic. Fiona's just shared the Menti through the link, so please use that. And I'll ask actually, maybe Fiona, if you could, yeah, thank you, so that people get the access code. Thanks. So you can scan the QR code. There's also a code 72553063 at the top of the screen. So we just want to see how comfortable you are right now with the topic of gender equality in capital markets. Okay, some differing scores coming in. And as with any questions, honesty is good. So it's totally okay at the start of the session or even at the end of the session to still not be totally comfortable. There's lots of learning to do. Give it one or another minute. Hopefully, sometimes there's some lags accessing the Menti. So for the first time, but hopefully, if you have any issues, please let us know, and we'll do our best to help you out from this side. Okay, I think that's about all the answers coming in. So we see folks right now are not the most comfortable in regards to knowledge of gender equality and global markets, but that's okay, because as said, that's why we're here today to go through these materials already. So thank you everyone for your answers to that question. And we'll move right along into the next part of the session. If you give me 1 second, there we go. Great. So now that we understand a bit more about this, let's look at how it actually, or excuse me, so together let's have a look at how gender connects to finance. So we have 3 main sections in each unit, narrowing into the topic a bit more with each unit. So we'll start by looking at what the case for action is, then we'll narrow in a little bit more and look at market trends. And for this unit, we'll look specifically at how markets are doing in terms of gender equality progress. And in the final section, we'll home in on terminology that helps us communicate about gender equality to various stakeholders in or outside of an organization. So to start, a big but basic question. So why does gender matter? So to get started, it's important to highlight that equality between genders is a human right. So it's widely documented that women and girls experience adverse impacts of business activities differently and often disproportionately. They also face additional barriers in seeking access to effective remedies. Moreover, because of multiple forms of discrimination, different women and girls may be affected differently. For example, it could be age, color, caste, class, ethnicity, religion, language, literacy, access to various economic resources, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, location, for example, in a rural location, based on migration, indigenous or minority status. So that's quite a long list of aspects that could influence how someone's treated. But that's all to say this is a complex and interconnected topic. So the document you see on your screen now is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or UNGPs, which are the global authoritative standards to prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related adverse human rights impacts. So on the slide, we flagged a few principles to help understand the obligations that businesses do have. So the first principle we highlight here is Principle 14, which indicates the responsibility of business enterprises to respect human rights applies to all enterprises, regardless of their size, sector, operational context, ownership, and structure. The second principle we highlight here is number 16, which encourages businesses to express their commitment to meet the human rights responsibility through a statement of policy that should have certain characteristics. You can read more about this in the document on your screen, and we'll also share it in the chat. But we do recommend taking a look at it if you've not already familiarized yourself with this publication. And then we have Principle 20 that we want to flag, which highlights that in order to verify whether adverse human rights impacts are being addressed, businesses should track the effectiveness of their response by using sex disaggregated data collected in line with a human rights-based approach and outcome indicators developed in consultation with affected people and gender experts. We'll be discussing this in more detail in part 2 in our communications module, but it's important also to recognize that even if the data is not made public, it's important to disaggregate the data so you can make better decisions internally and identify any issues as they may arise. And finally, Principle 21 particularly highlights the important role of communication. And according to this principle, businesses should be prepared to communicate externally, particularly when concerns are raised by or on behalf of affected stakeholders. So business enterprises should communicate adequately and easily accessible information to the affected stakeholders regularly. Both the information and the means of communication should be responsive to gender discrimination and the differentiated impacts experienced by women. So what's important to consider from a financial perspective is that in addition to being the right thing to do and having a positive impact on society, organizations should also be considering the repercussions associated with violating the human rights of employees, partners, and stakeholders. Policy or legal risk and reputational risks are obviously important risks to be considering for gender equality and social related disclosures as well. Now, with that, we have the 2030 agenda, and it's important to note that sustainable development depends on equality of genders. You may recognize the image here as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and gender equality is on its own as one of the 17 SDGs agreed to by UN member states, but it also contributes in one way or form to all of the other SDGs. So the SDGs represent an ambitious attempt to end poverty, protect the planet, improve the lives and well-beings of all humanity. And SDG 5 specifically focuses on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, but aspects of gender equality appear in the targets and associated indicators of 10 out of the 17 SDGs. So if you'd like to see how gender equality links to the different SDGs, you can have a look at Annex 3 of the SSE guidance on gender equality for exchanges. So when we ask what exactly does improving gender equality do for society, there's a number of answers. So first, violence in society decreases. So studies have shown that when we have more equality of gender in society, we also see lower levels of violence, greater economic productivity, and increased resilience against financial and environmental crises. I do want to remind you that by gender equality, we don't want to imply more women than men, but equality means that both women and men are represented, have the same level of power, and are both heard and understood equally. And however, to achieve equality, in many cases, we need to provide extra support to the less represented gender, which in many cases today is women. And to give you an example of the extent of impact that gender equality can have on society, a study by the World Bank estimates the loss in human capital due to gender inequality at over 160 trillion. And another study concluded that the equal participation by men and women entrepreneurs could boost global GDP by 3 to 6%. And to read more about this, you can check out the links in the slide on your handout. And the handout is on the website as well if you haven't seen that yet. So in terms of benefits, promoting gender equality of both genders has been found to have a positive social, environmental, economic, and business benefits. So if we narrow a bit deeper into these benefits that companies can find from enhancing equality in their organizations, we can see that companies with a higher levels of diversity, both gender and ethnic, at the executive level are found to show higher performance than less diverse counterparts in terms of both profitability and long-term value creation measures. As well, different genders have different attitudes towards risk. So if our decision makers, e.g. board and leadership team, are gender diverse across the organization and programs, this can lead to a more balanced decision-making process. Next, different genders experience the world differently, and therefore they have different views and ideas that they can bring to an organization. And companies with workplace policies that support and promote gender equality are actually better able to attract and retain talent. Next, gender lens investing mandated investments globally increased from just 100 million in 2014 to 2.4 billion in 2018. And that number continues to rise every year. Lastly, companies with more diverse boards and senior management teams demonstrate better ESG, or environmental, social, and governance performance, including having more ethical business practices, enhanced workplace and workforce policies, and stronger community relations. Okay, so next let's look at just one of the many studies on this topic to see a bit more details about the benefits diverse companies are seeing. So this data comes from a study by FP Analytics, the Independent Research and Advisory Division of Foreign Policy. So the study looked particularly at industries that are traditionally male-dominated, analyzing over 2,300 publicly listed companies around the world and more than 160 in-depth one-on-one interviews and follow-up surveys. So it was quite intensive. So the study found that companies with more women on the board have on average a higher profit, greater transparency, and higher social ratings. So we'll quickly look at those three statistics. First, profitability. So the study found that companies with the highest percentage of women in management were on average 47% more profitable than those with the lowest. And these findings are consistent with other evidence that promoting gender diversity can benefit a business's bottom line. Second, transparency. So building trust across stakeholder groups, including employees, employees, consumers, regulators, and investors is vital for legacy industries that are working to evolve their business models, improve compliance and performance, and respond to consumers' changing needs. And one thing in particular that they found was companies with at least one woman on the board are 17% more transparent than those with no female board members. And finally, on CSR, the analysis found a positive correlation between gender diversity on corporate boards and companies' social responsibility performance. So women interviewed for this study provided numerous firsthand accounts of their efforts to protect safety and labor rights, integrate community development into business strategy, build local capacity, and empower women. So those are some of more of the kind of internal impacts, but let's also look at external impacts of diverse leadership. So a few slides ago, we discussed how diversity and equality can have important societal and environmental impacts. And another interesting aspect of this same study was that equality not only had an impact within the company, but also for the environment where it operates. For example, more diverse boards were 39% more likely to reduce emissions and 60% more energy efficient than their peers with less diverse boards. And again, we have lots of resources in these handouts, so you can find a couple more studies if you'd like to delve a bit deeper into this. We'll also share in the chat a recent publication that came out from the IFC on gender responsive climate governance and the role of women leaders. And throughout the session, we'll also share some of SSE's own work and research. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Fiona, to take us through the next part.
Thanks very much, Landon, and a quick hello to everyone as well from my side. At this point, I will just say as well, please do feel free to share any comments you have as you're going along in the chat. We always love to know your reflections on this content and how it resonates with your company. So please don't be shy in sharing your experiences. And similarly, as we mentioned, any questions you might have, feel free to raise those in the Q&A. As we have some great experts joining us today, as we'll hear shortly, who I'm sure will be really happy to hear your questions. So now that we've had a look at the case for gender equality, we're going to narrow in a little bit more and have a look at the state of the market. So in this section in particular, we're going to focus on some key terms that we use when discussing gender equality. So before we dive into that, apologies, Landon, I just want to check, am I able to take control of the slides? I might be missing.
Oh, apologies. Give me 1 second,
Fiona.
Fiona.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, should be all good now.
Yep, thank you very much. So before we dive into the content, we're going to do another Menti. So the link should be the same as the one I gave you before. So I'll just move that along and then move the answer that was showing on the screen to you there, and then I'll just share my screen. So the question that we have for you now is, on our current trajectory, in how many years will the world achieve gender equality? So you can move the slider on the Menti there along to make a guess as to when we will achieve gender equality globally on our current trajectory. And your answer can be anywhere between now, so no years, and 500 years from now, but in any increment of 10. So I'll just share the Menti with you so we can see those results coming in. And hopefully everyone has been able to access that again. But if you have any issues, you can use the QR code on the screen there, the link that we've shared in the chat as well. So I'll just give you a second to input your responses. Great. Hopefully everyone has been able to access Menti okay, but if you are having any technical difficulties, feel free to message the team in the Q&A as well, and we can see if we can help you there. See a few more responses coming in, so I'll just give that a second. Great, hopefully everyone was able to vote that wanted to there. So I'll see we have a range of responses here, everything from the 500 end to some people kind of thinking a little bit more towards 100 years or less, and then another one in the 300s there. So the actual answer is 285 years. So some of you were more optimistic than that, some of you more negative, but obviously that's quite a long amount of time. And so we'll just get the slides back up there. So, you know, unfortunately, I think what that shows us is that it's really quite a long time before we will see gender equality on our current trajectory. And according to a report by UN Women, we'll share that now in the chat, it's actually nearly 300 years, as we've said. So this measurement differs based on how we measure gender equality. So, for example, the latest World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report indicates that it might take 130 years to achieve gender equality based on their calculations, which is perhaps a little bit more optimistic. But overall, we are seeing an indication that equality of people based on gender won't necessarily be achieved in our lifetimes, which is obviously quite a stark reflection. And then apologies, we will just move to another Menti there. I stopped sharing screens a little early, but we have a second question for you. So I'll just reshare Menti again. Move the question on for you. So the next question we wanted to ask you is just to get a sense of your understanding here and what you think on this point. So we want to see your thoughts on what percentage of listed company CEOs do you think are women? And yeah, take a second and let us know what you think the answer is to that. You see all of the responses typically look like they're sort of under the 15 or 20% mark there, mostly even in the tens. So just give that a second in case anyone else wants to vote there before I reveal the answer. Okay, great. So the actual answer is 0%. Sorry, is that in your country? Sorry, in Switzerland, 0%. So, you know, really quite stark of a revelation there. And this was based on our analysis that we did previously. So you'll see that that is, yeah, obviously quite a stark reflection to have. And so in particular as well, if we consider American companies here, there's a study that has been run on this front that looked at you know, which large companies are run by which individuals. And it was interesting in that study that it actually indicated that there were fewer large companies run by women in America than were run by men named specifically John. So obviously that's quite a stark indicator there that the glass ceiling is very much in place. And when we look at the chief executives of S&P 1500 firms in America, for each female CEO, there are 4 men named John, Robert, William, or James. So that's quite interesting. And as we've seen for your country there, that's really quite stark, obviously, in the difference we have in Switzerland as well. But if we look across different regions, which we're going to come on to shortly, there's progress needed in all areas as well. And then we will just do, one final Menti. So I'll just share that again, forgetting how many Mentis we have here, which is to say, what percentage of board seats do you think are held by women in your country? So have a guess, I guess, knowing the answer to the CEO question before, and see what you think of that. Okay, see, again, we have those votes coming in fairly low there. I will just check if we have the correct answer on the screen there, or if it really is that low. I'm not sure, Landon, do you happen to know that? Because I wonder if the figure's perhaps not been inputted.
Yeah, I think we're interesting tech mix-up, because no, that is not the correct figure. Off the top of my head, I believe it's 287. What percentage of board seats are? Oh yeah, apologies. Yeah, we'll get that answer and continue on. But
Thank you.
Apologies for the Menti technical difficulties.
Yes, apologies for that, everyone. I can give you the European figures that we have here, which is the average across the France, UK, Switzerland, and Germany area. And for that area, we had a percentage of board seats held by women as 36%, and of CEOs being women, which I'll just go back a step, is 6%. So still a very low figure, and we will just share with you the figure for Switzerland specifically in the chat from our report as well. But for 6% for the European region, which was not all that dissimilar to a lot of your votes, and then 36% for board seats, so a little bit higher. And so as you can see, a little bit further up the scale than some of you had guessed there, at least across Europe. But we'll come into a little bit of the reasons for that. And there's some regions in particular that have higher levels based on, for example, having legal mandates for that. So that was just to give us a little bit of a sense of how well things are going at the moment. And clearly there's quite a lot of room for improvement. So what we'll move on to covering now is thinking about some publications that sort of provide some more deep dive on all of this. So for anyone who hasn't seen these publications before, the SSE, in collaboration with the IFC, UN Women, and other partners, have worked together to provide markets with an overview or benchmark of current progress on gender leadership of listed companies. So we'll dive into these reports now and see how they compare to the results we were getting on Menti. So this in particular is last year's report, which covered the G20 in particular and did some regional groupings within that as well. So if we look at the report, we'll go into zooming into this in a little bit more detail, but you can see this first section here was the analysis which covered the G20, and we'll share the link to this publication in the chat so that you can read that in your own time. And any of these reports that we reference from the SSE can be found on our web pages as well. So this data can serve as a benchmark for exchanges and for other institutions to look at their efforts on promoting women and their full and effective participation and equal opportunities for them in corporate leadership positions. So what we'll do is zoom in a little bit more to that table that was probably a little bit small for you to read on the last slide. So in this table, we can see on the screen the average percentage of board seats held by women in the G20. And overall, that's about 22% across the G20, and with an overall positive trend line. So we're seeing improvements, but still many countries actually had decreases from previous years as well. And in case you can't see it, the top 5 exchanges in the G20 are located in France, the UK, Italy, Australia, and the US at the top there. It's also worth noting that given France leads the leaderboard, it's actually the case that France has a regulatory requirement for women on boards. So they require 40% of boards to be women. However, even though the percentage of women on boards is strong, among the highest in the world, France's female executive leadership pipeline is not as strong. So for this reason, in May 2021, the French Parliament voted to introduce gender quotas for executive leadership. And they said that they needed a 30% minimum for either gender by 2027 and 40% by 2030. So you'll see, even in France, where we have strong progress, we're having to see continued regulatory action to drive that progress as well. And so whilst we are seeing that many countries are improving a little bit year on year, we're also seeing some that are sliding backwards, and we can see that they still have quite a long way to travel. So for example, if we dig into a few data points there are only 3 markets in the G20 that have no all-male boards among their top 100 issuers. So we have the TSX in Canada, ASX in Australia, and the New York Stock Exchange in US that meet that and don't have any all-male boards. And then we have 11 markets in the G20 where more than 20% of the top 100 issuers have male-only boards. So a very mixed picture, as we say. We'll also have a little look beyond the G20 now as well at the regional picture. So when taking a regional approach to the data on gender equality, we find that only 2 regions have an average of over 30% women on boards. That's Europe and the second region you have here, which is perhaps a slightly unusual grouping of US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, or USCANs. So this is significant because it's been highly researched that at least 30% representation is required for a fair power distribution and for less represented groups to be heard. So ultimately, until we have at least that minimum level of 30%, we're unlikely to see, that real change in strategy and integration that we want to see. And Europe, as we've said, leads with 30% of board seats held by women. So that's significantly bolstered by France, where 45% of board seats in listed companies on the Euronext Paris are held by women. In the US Cannes region, it's not too far behind with 32%. Then in Africa, we obviously have a lower level at 22%. But in the Africa region, we actually have quite a lot of variance. So on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in South Africa, we have as many as 32% women on boards, while in Egypt on the EGX, just down at 12%. So it's quite a lot of variation. And then finally, we have the Southeast Asia and Eastern Asia regions with slightly lower representation, and unfortunately Latin America and Western Asia coming in with really quite low percentages. So as you'll see, a mixed picture, but room to improve in all regions, I think we'd agree. So we'll now have a little look at a final bit more data. I know it's quite a lot of numbers to talk about at the same time. We'll just have a quick look at the picture in Europe specifically. So if we look here, we have the top 5 kind of exchanges in Europe, including 6. And we look here at the percentage of board seats held by women. So we talked about some of these numbers already, but we have, this is the number for Switzerland, actually, sorry, that we were missing from the Menti results previously. So we have on 6, 28% of board seats held by women, and percentage of firms with at least 30% women on the boards at 42%. So unfortunately, you see that means that 6 does come at the lower end of these European exchanges that we've compared here. However, it is positive to see that we have an improvement year on year in board seats. So that's great to see that there is an improvement in the direction of travel, and hopefully that momentum will continue. But I think it's obvious here, we can see that difference with France and Euronext having those regulatory requirements, that it has ultimately put France quite a long way ahead of other exchanges in that regard. So let's now take a little moment to hear from you and think about some of the barriers. That kind of gives us the data picture of where we're up to. But of course, we know it's not straightforward to fix these issues, and it's going to take time, resource, etc. So it would be great to think about what might prevent your company or your organization or your region from advancing these particular metrics. So it would be great if you would be able to share with us in the chat any thoughts that you may have on barriers, any particular barriers that you see within your organization or that you might expect to apply more broadly. So please do share your thoughts. And as we go along through that, I'll share some thoughts on some key barriers that we see, but we'd love to know as well, in particular, which ones you might be facing. So in addition to the structural obstacles faced by women in the general workforce, such as unequal regulatory environments, a lack of workplace flexibility, and conflicts between work and family obligations, there are some specific barriers that narrow women's leadership paths and cause the drop in representation at the top. This is really where we dive into the complexities of this topic, so I highly recommend reviewing these in your own time. In the meantime, let's go through a few of these. So if we look at the data on sex disaggregated data, so we often actually see that we have limits in availability of that data. So this can make it difficult to measure progress or understand the extent of the gender gap. And in turn, this creates challenges in identifying effective interventions to close the gaps. We also see a lack of training and professional development opportunities. Particularly, this can be areas for frontline operational or financial responsibilities, and that can ultimately hinder women's ability to attain qualifications in this field. We also have a lack of gender-sensitive human capital management. So this can include hiring, retention, and promotion practices. So we may have non-diverse hiring committees, limited use of gender-blind applications, etc., which can lead to decisions based on biases rather than actual qualifications. And failure to recruit widely for applicants or not embedding a gender lens into job postings can also reduce the number of qualified female applicants. And biases and stereotypes that suggest that women don't have the characteristics that need to lead can also be a problem. So this can include biases towards things such as logical thinking and decisiveness, or creating a double bind in which women are expected to be nice or competent, but can't necessarily be both. These biases are more subtle than the norms that deliberately exclude women, but can be more challenging to overcome. A lack of awareness or skepticism about the business case for gender-based leadership is another issue. So this can mean that initiatives to advance women may not be a top strategic priority for companies. As allies, men in leadership who've embraced the values of diversity and inclusion can help to elevate the importance of such initiatives and to drive action. Limited access to networks and connections is another area. So this can make board and management qualified women less visible to nominating committees and to prominent men who could advocate as allies and champions. So they may just not be able to access the networks that they need to get those opportunities. And then we have the issue of role models, mentors, and coaches. This can stunt women's professional development and potential. Individuals such as coaches or mentors can play an important role in boosting women's self-confidence and guide their professional journeys. Then we have the concept of unsuitable work environments. Particularly, this is the case in perhaps more traditionally male-dominated industries, for example, utilities companies. And this can make it more difficult for women to pursue long-term career paths in these fields. So, for example, there may not be a women's locker room for changing out of uniforms, for example, or maybe not even a women's washroom for managing menstruation with privacy. So, whilst not specific to women in leadership, such a lack of accommodation can represent an overall deterrent to women entering the sector and progressing through the leadership ranks. And I know personally I've faced that experience working in the energy industry earlier in my career, where if you would visit oil and gas operational sites, there often might be only one women's bathroom on the entire site, which could involve walking perhaps 15 to 20 minutes across the site, whereas there would be men's bathrooms all over the place. So that was, quite a difficult factor for women that worked on that facility. And then also we do have safety concerns, of course. So particularly in operational locations, gender-based violence and harassment can represent a serious deterrent to women's professional advancement. And gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace and domestic sexual violence can be experienced outside of the workplace as well, but affect employees' well-being and the business operations. So this can lead to, of course, reduced productivity, absenteeism, and higher employment turnover. And ultimately, it can deter women from pursuing promotions and career development opportunities that are stepping stones to leadership. So those are just kind of a run through of some of the key barriers. I also see we have Javier had shared in the chat about low employment as well. Yeah, absolutely. Osman's mentioned inequality for sure. So thank you for that. And it's important to note that achieving a truly gender diverse senior leadership team and optimizing the real value in diversity is about more than sheer numbers and gaining parity and representation. So we've talked a lot about data here, but that only tells half the story. The key is really about ensuring that men and women have an equal voice and agency once they are in leadership roles so that they can contribute to determining their organization's path. So to increase the number of women leaders and prepare them to take on those leadership roles, companies have to really invest in women. This means attending to the culture and purpose of their organizations. And it means adopting a more people-focused business model as part of the approach that integrates an ESG orientation into all aspects of operations. So if you'd like to dive deeper into this topic, I really recommend reading a recent publication from the IFC on gender-responsive climate governance, which I think we have also shared with you in the chat already. So in particular, this report looks at why we aren't seeing the levels of female representation that we'd like. In other words, what barriers are getting in the way. And some examples of what the report finds are a lack of knowledge or training on the topic, a low level of climate and gender lens literacy, and a low understanding of the impacts on business. So do please take a look at that report in your own time, and you'll have the link to that in the PowerPoint materials. Brilliant. So with that, I will hand over to Landon for our next segment. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona. So as we move into the next section, and before we take a short break, let's go a bit more into the complexity of this topic and focus in on some key terms used when we discuss gender equality. So with that, we're going to go to another Menti, and let's look at what you think of when you think of gender and gender equality. So there's no right or wrong answers here. And if you can think of just one or two words, that's all right as well. So you should be able to see that. Yep, it's there now. So let's see some answers. Hopefully you have some ideas. Okay, power. Yep, absolutely. It's a common issue when we discuss gender equality, the power imbalance. In the chat, I see equal opportunities. Okay, very good. Thank you for that. That's definitely an element. Growth and opportunity, absolutely. Give it a few more seconds. Any ideas that come to mind? Stereotypes and biases, absolutely. Those are very relevant when we discuss gender and gender equality. Okay, and barriers, absolutely. What Fiona was discussing, definitely important there. So thank you for that. Thank you for those answers. We'll go back to go back to the PowerPoint, and we'll look at a specific definition of what gender means. So those are all good answers, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we all understand the depth and complexity of gender, which is not simply sex, being male or female. So the purpose of this initial exercise is to make sure everyone understands that gender is not the same as sex and that gender can differ in different contexts and societies. So it's important because it's not really different sexes we always need when we speak about the value of diversity. It's actually different ways of thinking, different life experience or lived experiences, and different institutional restrictions or freedoms. So while the term gender is actually quite difficult to define, because it means something different to all kinds of people, let's try to get a better understanding together of how we could define it. So UN Women defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men and boys and girls, as well as the relations between women and those between men. So these attributes, opportunities, and relationships are socially constructed and learned through socialization processes. They are context and time specific and changeable. Gender determines what is expected, allowed, and valued in a woman or a man in a given context. So in most societies, there are differences and inequalities between women and men in responsibilities assigned, activities undertaken, access to and control over different resources, as well as decision-making opportunities. And gender is a part of the broader socio-cultural context. So other important criteria, some of which we mentioned already, can include class, race, poverty level, ethnic group, and age. So as such, gender is not quite as simple as male or female. Gender can be influenced and defined based on the nature of certain relationships, based on hierarchies, history, context, institutions, or norms. And most importantly, when we're discussing gender equality today, please remember that we're referring to equality of the genders, not simply increasing women on boards. Now, please feel free to explore this and other gender equality terms on the gender equality glossary developed by UN Women that we link to in the slides. So let's dive a bit deeper now. I'm sure a lot of you are aware or have heard of the acronym DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We're increasingly seeing DEI managers or teams and organizations focused on ensuring an organization's DEI performance. So some might ask, why not just diversity teams or just equity teams? So let's discuss a bit more how these concepts connect and interact, and the importance of having all three of these terms as a full equation. So to start with equity on the bottom left. So equity is ensuring that there's equitable power distribution amongst people. So you can think of equity as providing women and men with the same microphone that amplifies their voices to the same extent so that everyone can hear them both equally. Which you might be thinking, well, that's the objective, right? Well, not quite. It's just part of the picture. So let's say, for example, that our objective is equity, equal power distribution, but there are no women in the organization to fairly distribute power to. So there's no one to actually pick up the microphone or speak into it. So this means we also need to focus on diversity. So diversity is ensuring representation. So the act of inviting the unrepresented gender to join the board enhances diversity of a board. So think of diversity as having enough seats at the table for diversity to be represented at this table. Again, differences and different lived experiences are important to organizations. So it's not enough to have microphones at the table to make sure everyone can speak at the same volume, but also enough chairs so that a diverse group of participants are at that table and willing to speak. But if we just have these two, we can have cultural assimilation take place where we expect, for example, women to act just like the men, and then we'll struggle to keep them on the board, and we won't be benefiting from that diversity and different lived experiences that we aim to achieve. And it's no good to give someone a microphone if they're not willing to speak, or alternatively, to claim by giving someone the power to speak based on their appearances alone is actually achieving diversity, when the objective of diversity is to include diverse ways of thinking and lived experiences. So this is also why we have inclusion, the third element. So this refers to behaviors and the practice of making all members of an organization feel welcomed, give them equal opportunity to connect, belong, and to grow, to contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. So to bring it all together, we can say that diversity is being invited to the boardroom, equity is then having the empowerment to speak at the board meeting, and inclusion is being listened to within that board meeting. But of course, this goes a lot further than the boardroom and should be considered organization-wide. So the end goal is then equality, which depends on all three circles: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we can have diversity without equity or inclusion, and it won't be sustained. Equally, we can have equity without diversity, and we still won't be making any progress. So when we talk about equality today and in the next session, especially when we talk about the benefits it brings, remember that we're not simply looking for an equal number of men and women on boards or in organizations. What we really want is these three things: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can find in the handout a more detailed version of this diagram, but hopefully this is a good pause to give you a few minutes, take a tea or stretch, grab a cup of coffee, and when the 5-minute music ends, we'll continue on. Yeah, please take a few minutes to stretch or grab some tea.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed a nice stretch of the legs, grabbed a drink, etc., or otherwise just enjoyed that very calming music, which I know I do sometimes. Great. Sorry, I'm just having trouble moving the slide along for some reason. Landon, so I'm not sure if you could just move me along and hopefully it'll catch up for me. Thank you. So great, now that we have those initial concepts clear from the sessions before the break, we're going to dive in now to a little bit more of the content and start with how we can enhance an organization's performance on gender equality. So starting off, the first objective of our next unit is all around align. So this is ensuring that your practices align with the global best practices and standards, as well as any local or peer practices that should guide your efforts. So if we begin by looking at the global principles that companies can use to enhance their practices, the global practices we're going to discuss today are the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, or WEPs. So before we go into the principles, we wanted to get a sense of your current familiarity with the Women's Empowerment Principles. So we have a little Zoom poll that should appear for you in a second to let us know whether your organization is already a signatory of the WEPs. So hopefully that should be appearing on your screens momentarily. And if not, I guess as we're a small group, maybe you can message in the chat. I'm not sure if we're having any poll issues there, Landon, at all. Okay, let's do it via chat if that's okay. So if you could just let us know yes or no if you're a signatory to the WEP principles already, that would be great. Just interesting to get a sense of who we have in the room. And we should say, if anyone isn't a signatory already, we're going to be giving you some more information about how to become one at the end of this section as well. So I see from the responses we've had in the chat, we have a mix of responses so far, most indicating they're not currently signatories, and maybe one person who is, so that's interesting to see. So thanks very much for sharing. So feel free to keep letting us know in the chat on that front. And in the meantime, we're very lucky to have with us today, as we mentioned and introduced Maya at the start of the session, an expert on the UN WEPs. So Maya is joining us from the Women's Empowerment Principles Secretariat, and she's here today to help provide an overview of the WEPs and to answer any of your questions about them. Before we get started on that, however, we're going to play a quick video to introduce the WEPs to you. So we'll just play that video for you now. Great, thanks, Andy.
Think about the impact of a signature. Think about the magnitude of a global movement. Think about the difference you can make and the power of transformative change. By signing the Women's Empowerment Principles, you can galvanize your shareholders and stakeholders to drive change in the workplace, marketplace, and community through a framework of 7 principles. Brought to you by UN Women and UN Global Compact, the Women's Empowerment Principles are a roadmap for business sustainability, innovation, and productivity. Businesses by the thousands and in every sector are becoming part of this world-changing movement to advance gender equality. Businesses that become models for attracting talent, entering new markets, serving their communities, and measurably improving the bottom line. Because gender equality means better business. Don't miss this moment to make a lasting impact on your employees, suppliers, customers, and investors. Join leading companies already on the journey to greater sustainability and growth. Commit to the Women's Empowerment Principles and make today your organization's signature moment.
Great. Hopefully that was a helpful overview. And I'll pass over to you now, Maya. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Thank you, Landon. This was a great introduction. So my name is Maya Löfström, and I'm the WEPS program analyst at UN Women, and I'm excited to be part of this training session to introduce you to the Women's Empowerment Principles, also called the WEPS. And this is a very special session for me because I live in Switzerland, Geneva, so it's really great to be here with you. And here you can see that with the rising importance of reporting and ESG, environmental, societal, and governance, more companies are realizing the need to focus on gender equality. However, many are very unsure of how to turn the recognition into action. So that's where the WEPS come in. The WEPS serve as a practical guide to integrating gender equality into business strategy and operations, impacting both the workplace, marketplace, and community. So the WEPS really offer a holistic framework for companies to work on advancing gender equality while also driving positive outcomes for both business and society. So this provides a roadmap for you to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is on gender equality. And here on this slide, you can see the global reach of the WEPS. We have over 10,000 companies in 190 plus countries that have committed to the principles. So this really demonstrates the widespread impact of the WEPS initiative. So here we can take the next slide. And on this slide, you can see the 7 principles which we are working with. And I'll briefly walk you through them. So principle 1 is on the CEO and leadership commitment. So here it's not only about promoting women in leadership roles, but ensuring that top executives are committed to making gender equality a core strategy. So the CEO has to sign, and this really shows to us that it will be driven throughout the whole business and in the company. And then we have principle 2, 3, and 4, which focuses on the workplace. Principle 2 is about treating all employees fairly without any discrimination. Principle 3 is about ensuring health, safety, and well-being at work. And principle 4 is about providing education and training for career growth. And I think it's important to just think innovatively about all of these principles and what would work for your company. We have a little bit of an example from principle 2, which is a bank in Spain where they noticed that men were advancing more quickly because they worked very late. They didn't leave the office until 9 or 10 at night, while the women had to leave early for family responsibilities. So to level the playing field here, they introduced a policy to close the offices at 7 p.m. And this really helped to create equal opportunities for career progression for both men and women. And then we have principle 5, which is about the marketplace. It encourages companies to promote a more diverse supply chain and gender-responsive marketing. So at UN Women, we work with companies to adopt gender-responsive procurement as a part of the sustainable supply chain. And then we have principle 6. It's about community engagement. And it's really urging companies to consult and engage with the local women and girls, as well as men and boys, to ensure that the initiatives truly benefit them, to understand where you are working and what will work for that local population. And then we have principle 7, which focuses on measuring and publicly reporting progress. This is something that companies can be a bit worried about, but it is a really good thing to do to be able to be more transparent. And companies are here encouraged to collect data and track their gender equality efforts. And we can go to the next slide. So becoming a WEPS signatory means embarking on a journey towards gender equality. After signing up, companies are expected to engage in internal stakeholders, show this public commitment, and work across the value chain, and also report on the progress. So it's not about quick wins, it's really about addressing systematic inequalities that has a lasting change in your company. So this slide shows the steps that companies take after joining, from activating internal stakeholders to sustaining this progress through regular data collection and reporting. And this might sound like a little bit of a difficult journey, but it's not at all difficult. And at UN Women, we offer over 300 tools and resources to guide companies on how to work with the webs. So just if you join, it kind of walks you through the steps very easily. And now we can take the next slide. Exactly. So this is on how to become a web signatory. So your company needs to be legally registered. We accept companies from all sectors, all sizes, and ownership types as well. Stock exchanges are eligible. In fact, now we have over 35 stock exchanges that has made a commitment to the webs. And when you continue with the application process, you can simply go to the webs.org website to fill out the online form to join to become a web signatory. It's just important that you also read up and understand the requirements and what we are looking for, and that you take the commitment very seriously. So you'll also be making an action plan. And to get more info on this, you can go to the webs.org website. And that was actually it from my side for now. So thank you so much for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Maya. That's a really good introduction. And I know from the SSE perspective, we really recommend that anyone looking to get started on this topic definitely starts by working with you and your leadership to become signatories of the web. So that's brilliant to have a good overview there. And for anyone who is already a web signatory, which I think we had 1 or 2 respondents who were, we wanted to flag also that what you could consider doing next was to look at the EDGE standard, which is highlighted on this slide. So this really takes your commitment a step further by having your gender equality practices certified. So the EDGE provides a certification service that helps you take your practices further. It provides a communication tool to show the market how you're leading on gender equality, and just really helps you to keep raising the bar. So thank you so much for that. So with that, I'll hand over to Landon, who's now going to take us through the local perspective.
Great, thanks so much. So moving along, going into align with local, we've had a look at global initiatives. So let's have a look at what should be considered based on your location. So one of the key factors that should be considered based on where you're based or where your company is listed, as well as where your main operations are, is regulation. So let's discuss what we're seeing a bit more from a regulatory perspective. So on the slide, we see a number of markets where there's some kind of gender quota or requirement set for listed companies. This is from a previous report we produced. So on the right, you can see the current status of gender diversity on the boards of companies in these markets, as well as the percentage of female board chairs and CEOs. One question we're often asked is whether or not quotas or mandatory requirements work. And if they should be implemented in a country or even a region. This is a hotly debated topic, and if you'd like to dig a bit deeper into that topic, you can review the extra slides we've included in the handout today, available on our website, which provides some insight from a recent study featured by the UNPRI about gender-based quota policies. But as we've seen in the data that we discussed today, sometimes these policies or quotas work, and sometimes they don't. Why is that? Well, it's not entirely, totally clear. A portion of this is because it really depends on how the company implements these quotas. So what actions are taken by the company and how such a rule or regulation might be interpreted. So let's come down to the company level to see what we mean by how a company implements it and do a little exercise together. Sorry, a few extra slides there that you can find in your handout. So in terms of corporate strategies, we're going to look at 2 hypothetical companies. We'll call one Owl Incorporated and another Peacock PLC. These are, of course, made up fictional companies, but the discussion we'll have about their decision-making processes and actions is based on research and on real companies. So both of these companies have 10% women in executive leadership. but both have parity, 50% women and men in operational level positions, and they both have a new female CEO who makes gender equality a priority. They also have one thing in common. They both just had a change in leadership and have this new CEO. And this new CEO at both companies is passionate about gender equality, and they want to achieve equality at the top of the organization as well, at the board and leadership levels, so that they can be included in a gender equality index. That will give them more exposure to investors that value gender parity. So each company, however, took a bit of a different approach towards their goals of gender equality, and therefore we see them having differing results. So we'll discuss now their two approaches and what actions they took. To start, we'll look at Peacock PLC. So as mentioned, they have the new CEO, and they set a target of 40% women in leadership positions in just 2 years. To do this, they make an announcement, the CEO being a woman herself. She also shares her experience as a woman in business. And to help reach this 40%, they set a hiring freeze of any men until the target is reached, unless approved by her for extenuating circumstances. So some employees might be feeling excited and empowered, but some women in the company are also scared of potentially more pressure to move up or out. And then the men have some job security concerns with the new policy. So the overall sentiment in the organization is a mixture of excitement and fear and some associated feelings. Now let's look on the other side at what Owl Inc. does. So again, a new CEO committed to gender equality in leadership positions. So instead of the 40% target and hiring freeze, this CEO decides to join the 30% club. This 30% club calls on its members to commit to at least 30% female representation on their boards and executive leadership teams, because this is the critical mass at which minority voices become heard. So they want to kind of surpass 30%. So while they want to surpass this 30%, the CEO isn't actually sure what the root cause of the lack of representation at the top is, and why women aren't in the leadership positions. So they also set up an internal task force to try to identify the barriers and blocks that women are facing in the company. And they also initiate a reverse mentorship program, because as mentioned, there's the 50% parity. So there's a question of why the women at the lower levels aren't able to be mentored by some at more senior levels. So with that, we've seen a bunch of different strategies and actions that these two fictional companies are taking. But in the real world, we'll turn it to you on this Menti of what strategies do you think will work best? So to reiterate, some of the strategies we saw with the companies were a target of 40% women in 2 years with a hiring freeze of the overrepresented gender, joining the 30% club, creating a gender equality task force, initiating a reverse mentorship program, sharing personal examples of role models. So we'll give you, if we're able to have the Menti up, we'll do that. And we'll give you a minute to think about what you think are the best strategy if you rank them. Okay, we'll give a few more seconds, hopefully get a couple more answers here. Okay, so let's discuss this a bit. Let's see. Okay, so in the first, things changing a bit, but the first option or first ranked we have is setting a target of 40% women in leadership. Okay, so one thing that this often is the case where we see this target of 40% far above the 30% club, but we do just want to discuss this a little bit because of course we recognize 40% is higher, but this is also, we've seen it almost act as a ceiling target of companies reaching for 40% and that kind of being the cap almost, where 30% is actually a bottom target or the lowest acceptable they want to achieve. So, we just want to note that the 40% versus 30% is a bit different. The 30% club recognizes that at a minimum, there needs to be the 30% for minority voices to be heard. So the 30% club can actually be more effective than setting the target of 40%, but it can depend on what other initiatives are undertaking. Yeah, it's great to see the reverse mentorship program in second. That can be fantastic. Sharing examples of role models at the top. So the interesting difference between these two is that the sharing examples is kind of a one-way form of communication, where the mentorship program allows for two-way communication. So this often helps ensure that both genders are learning and growing and can adapt lessons or learning to their own circumstances by asking questions and having that conversation and discussing. So it could certainly be expected that the reverse mentorship program would actually be more effective than the role models at the top. Interestingly, the gender equality task force is in fifth. So often, sometimes that's ranked a bit lower from groups. But we do just want to note that if a company comes in and they do a target of the 40% women in leadership or reverse mentorship program, they still might not know what the root cause is of women in the organization not moving up and towards the top or being in the top positions. So often creating a gender equality task force can be a really good way of uncovering some additional issues in the organization that need to be resolved or advanced to fix the gender equality issue. And then the 6 is initiating the hiring freeze. This certainly makes sense that I think folks ranked it a bit lower. So looking at initiating a hiring freeze of the overrepresented gender versus a gender equality task force, as mentioned, those are two very different approaches. But the first moves the power from one to the other, where the second looks to better understand those power dynamics, which is, of course, the task force. So earlier, I discussed the equity circle in the DEI slide and the importance of power dynamics. But also remember that we still want diversity, so we shouldn't be taking power from one and giving it to the other gender, but rather identifying the root cause and trying to address that instead. Okay, we'll go back to the slides, but thank you for the answers. It's always an interesting discussion on what a company should and maybe should not prioritize for initiatives. One second here. So now we want to look back at Peacock and some of the impacts that may result from taking an approach like OWL Incorporated and targets. So with Peacock, they saw some immediate progress after setting a quota, but they didn't identify those underlying issues that we're discussing that could be the root cause. So it can result in some women being promoted, but also demotivating men in the organization, as men may feel like they have less security and less opportunity to grow, which could result in a bit of a culture issue in the organization, which we'll touch on a bit later and in the next session. They also could have experienced filling positions taking longer and sometimes not being the right candidate, and external hiring to fill positions, which again can impact a culture in the organization with higher turnover, less innovation, and risks taken. So here the CEO, they obviously had great intentions, but they still weren't aware of the root cause of gender equality in their organization. Now, on the other hand, with Owl Inc., so the new CEO had similar ambitions and intentions as Peacock, but they obviously went about it differently, as we discussed. So Owl probably had to invest a bit more upfront, but they will very soon have a return on this investment, where we can see that Peacock will have to pay for not making an investment upfront. So Owl Inc. took a more holistic approach and realized that if they wanted to benefit from the changes in their organization leadership, when they managed to achieve gender equality, this would have to be not only accepted by the whole organization, but also they need to tackle specific issues within the organization that caused the lack of diversity to begin with. And that's where we go to the task force that we discussed. So they created a task force, they implemented a reverse mentorship program, and through this, they were able to identify not only some specific barriers that came from inflexible working arrangements, biased benefits, or a lack of support for certain genders to be able to succeed and thrive in an organization, but they were also able to change the leadership's culture through the mentorship program, which opened their eyes to the value of diversity in decision-making processes. So as a result, the company actually saw increased innovation, since, as we discussed, that diversity leads to more pushback of ideas, but also it pushed leaders to think of new and innovative solutions to problems. And since they ended up saving resources associated with external hires, they could also continue to train and educate staff members to further enhance the culture within the organization that they were looking for. So overall, more of a success with the Owl Incorporated approach. Now, as mentioned, corporate culture. So, you can set a quota and you can attempt things like this, but it can impact corporate culture, and there still may be deeper issues within an organization. So we don't actually have enough time today. We have still a lot to cover, but I do recommend you review this before our next session on the 30th. It is a useful slide that gives you a list of actions you can take to make sure you're identifying the root cause and not making the same mistakes as Peacock PLC. So with that, we'll move on to our next Zoom poll and wrap up this section. So how could your company, or how should your company, improve its financial performance? And you can select more than one here. I'll just try to pop up that poll. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, hopefully it's popped up on your screen. If not, please let me know and I'll see if I can fix it.
Yeah, we can see that, Landon.
Okay, thanks. Give folks a few more seconds here. Okay, great. I'm going to end it there and share the results. So we saw lots of folks choosing implementing policies that promote gender diversity, collecting gendered segregated data, and setting gender-based targets. So well done. The correct answers are 1, 3, and 5, which were the ones selected. So well done. But you do require all 3, not just one of them. For example, with just gender-based targets, but no policies to ensure women are supported to stay in leadership roles, and there's not data being collected to better understand why less women apply for promotions or leadership roles, then you'll likely be missing the root of the problem and constantly struggle to reach equality. And again, without this, there won't be sustainable equality. You require equity. So fantastic. Well done, everyone. We'll move along and, oh, 1 second here. So moving along, oh, there we go. So after looking at the global and local levels, let's focus on the level of companies, and we're going to look at some peer group practices to stay ahead. And to kick us off here, I will pass it back to Maya to add some color to this discussion.
Thank you so much, Landon. So here are some examples of implementing the WEPs by the WEP signatories. So some signatories have decided to work on the workplace issues. I think, Landon, the slides are not coming through. There we go, yeah. So we have an example of a management company in South Africa who decided to implement a strategy to increase women's representation to 40% across all senior levels of the organization. To achieve this, they launched a women's leadership development program to enhance the recruitment of women. So with this clear goal in place and an action plan, the company exceeded its targets, reaching over 41% of women in senior level positions. We also have another example from Sweden, where I'm from, where they tackled the gender pay gap for their 16,000 employees in 4 countries. In Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Sweden, they put in place a job evaluation system and kept it updated regularly. So this was critical to understanding what makes roles comparable to others and how equal pay can really be measured in a company. And they also followed up with close monitoring and reporting of the program and produced reports on a regular basis. So this was key for their success on achieving equal pay. And others have gone to the marketplace issues. Here we have a financial platform in the US that aimed to increase lending to women entrepreneurs, particularly those from really small businesses, to enhance their economic resilience and independence. So to achieve this, they established a dedicated fund focused on improving access to capital for women-owned businesses and reducing their cost of borrowing. So as a result, they committed ensuring that approximately 40% of their annual capital allocation would be directed towards women-owned businesses. And this was a huge success for them and also regaining that capital. And the last example I have is a bank in Palestine that's been supporting women-owned businesses to improve financial inclusion for women in the country. So they provided comprehensive financial awareness and banking literacy training to women-owned businesses. And they also run a mini MBA program for women entrepreneurs to develop their business skills and access financial product to support them in growing their businesses. So lastly, companies participated in the WEPS Business Accelerator to support their WEPS journey with UN Women support. And now I can take the next slide. And as I said to you before, we have a lot of tools to help you on your WEPS journey. And one of them is the Gender Action Plan module, the Gender Responsive Recruitment Checklist, and the Gender Responsive Procurement Tool. As I said, it might sound a bit difficult, but it's really not. And we have a lot of sources to guide you on how to implement the WEPS in a really good way. And becoming a WEP signatory is about so much more than just signing up. It's about making a real and lasting commitment to gender equality in your business practices and also contributing to more inclusive economies. Whether through leadership development, equal pay, or supporting women entrepreneurs, the WEPs provide a clear path for driving progress and creating meaningful change. So we invite you to join this global initiative towards gender equality. And thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing the impact your companies will make and to hear from you in the future. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Maya, for talking us through those examples and resources. So at this time, we're going to invite a guest speaker, Harry Ogenbar, an ESG specialist, Bloomberg, as mentioned at the start, to do a bit more deep dive into gender indices. So I'll turn it over to you now, Harry, to talk us through this interesting topic.
Thank you, Landon, and hi everyone. Nice to virtually meet you all. I'll just take over the screen share now. Sorry. Do I have access to share?
Let me double check. I think you do. Oh, apologies. That's my mistake, Harry. But please go ahead. Should be good now.
All right. Thank you. Is it working now?
Yep, we can see your deck now.
Awesome. Okay. Yes. So thank you. Yeah, so I'm Harry. I am an ESG data specialist at Bloomberg, working on our Gender Equality Index, which is kind of being rebranded at the moment, as I'll explain in a minute, to a Gender Equality Score here at Bloomberg. So I'll just go through a quick agenda, 15 minutes. So for a few minutes, I'll talk to you about the history of the Gender Equality Index / score, what we're doing to our model and future developments. I'll explain what's in it for listed companies and kind of how you can get involved and how it will benefit you. Then I'll just explain a little bit about the sort of data points that we look at and capture as part of those scores and how everything looks on the Bloomberg terminal, so how investors are consuming this data. And then the largest part will be a training exercise where we'll just kind of put all of that into something practical where we'll stage a very, very basic model of a investor or Bloomberg client looking through gender data and looking at the sorts of things they can consume and how they might think about it. So while you read through the slides, I'll go through the history first. So Bloomberg's Gender Equality Index was launched back in 2016. And when it was launched, it was a survey of 26 US financial companies only. Since that time, it grew to around about 600 companies across, I think it was 27 different countries and completely sector agnostic. You know, we had energy companies, as we heard about earlier, we had financials as well. And it was all designed to kind of start shedding light on something that has previously been quite opaque, gender inclusion in companies' workforces. In our new score, we have scored over 3,000 companies as part of our initial run, with the ambition to expand that to over 15,000 listed companies as of next year. So we're very proud of how that's grown and the doors that we've opened through our data collection. But with conversations through our stakeholders and our own research, we decided to move away from that survey model and start scoring companies based on public data. So this score started as a survey, is now public data. It's not opt-in or opt-out. It's what we call unsolicited. It's just based on what's out there on companies' websites. As part of our kind of redevelopment, we've consulted with corporates like yourselves, people that had previously been really engaged in our survey, as well as a few corporates that we were aware of that had never engaged in our survey, to discuss the sort of data points that they're willing to disclose, that they actually capture internally and that kind of thing, as well as Bloomberg clients to find out what's really important and material for them when they're making investment decisions on gender. So for the future, as I said, we've got a new score coming out that's based on over 3,000 companies, with the ambition to widen that to over 15,000 sort of in next year. As it's a new score, there is a real opportunity for corporates that are engaged and interested in kind of differentiating themselves to get ahead and start disclosing early. One thing that we've seen from moving away from our survey to moving to capturing public data is that not a lot of companies disclose a lot of data. So by engaging early and just disclosing, we give score credit for disclosure. Like you will kind of get ahead. It doesn't really matter what the metrics are, just by disclosing, you will stand out and have a good score pretty quickly. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at and how things look. So as I said, I want to make this sort of interactive rather than me just speaking at you for another 10 minutes. So we're going to go to a case study. So we have two companies here that will now be known as Company A and Company B. The aim of the case study will be to figure out which company is Company A and which company is Company B. So we have Louis Vuitton, obviously a very high profile luxury fashion brand, and Under Armour, which is a popular sportswear brand. So if you were just thinking about those companies and how they might, how their workforces might look, what benefits they might have in place and those sorts of things based on, gender biases, thinking about a fashion brand, thinking about a sports brand, thinking about a European company versus an American company, all of those sorts of things. Just have that in the back of your mind. And then we'll take a look at how data that Bloomberg captures and data that these companies disclose can change those perceptions. So as I said, one of these companies is Company A, one of these companies is Company B, and we'll do a little Zoom poll at the end to see if everyone can guess the right company. Just to kind of do a bit of background, Bloomberg has some ESG scores that we run. The gender score is completely separate to the ESG scores, and obviously, typically S and G, social and governance, are where you would typically think that gender fits in. We've done this, and I just wanted to show you these scores just because I want to highlight how nuanced gender is. And how it is difficult to fit into, social or governance. Is a question that I typically get quite a lot in my role, is where do you see gender? Is it a social metric? Is it a governance metric? The answer is that we see it as a standalone thing. So just looking at these scores, you can see that Company A has a slightly higher social score than Company B, but it has a slightly lower governance score than Company B as well. So it just kind of shows how, one company can be good at social, one company can be good at governance, but their gender scores will be different as we look. Another thing I just wanted to flag is that there are elements of gender within both of these scores. So social supply chain management is something that we typically look at in terms of the diversity of a company's supply chain. And then a really big and obvious one is, gender diversity on the board. So those are elements of the social and governance scores, but the gender score itself obviously looks at these things as well as a few other things. So what I have is some survey data from financial year 2021. That's the last year that we gathered data from the survey, and I'm just using it for that purpose because our gender scores are being finalized today, actually. So the new gender score will be out, very, very, very soon. But it's not quite out just yet. So we're just looking at old data. All of these data points that I'm sharing with you and presenting are part of the new score, so everything's still up to date. It's just looking at some slightly old data. So take a look at this slide, have a look through the data points, and these are the sorts of metrics that we're interested in and that companies typically have begun to disclose publicly. So we have women on board, women executives, so women at the highest levels, women throughout different levels of management and the total workforce and hierarchy, as well as the percent of women of total promotions. So that one is of everyone in a company who received a promotion, what percent of those were women? And then percent women attrition is the percent of people that left the company, what percent of those were women? So those kind of metrics are all looking at the workforce diversity and basically the current picture and what they're looking like. Then we have some more benefit related ones in the second table below. So we have parental leave, looking at how companies pay for parental leave rather than just offering, a certain number of weeks unpaid. We always look to make sure that it's paid. Parental leave retention rate. So that one is of people that took parental leave, how many remained employed 1 year on. That one's really important, and there's lots of research on that one to show basically the culture around taking parental leave. If people are leaving really quickly after coming back from parental leave, it might mean that opportunities are limited, and taking an extended time of parental leave might be slightly frowned upon or something like that. So that's a really important one. And then we have flexible work benefits and backup family care benefits. We have a number of policy fields where do you have this policy in place? Just yes or no. So those ones are a bit more simple, but they're all important and part of our new score. So just make sure you're taking a look at company A and company B. You can see that company A has more women in general. It has more women in middle management and senior management, and just in general throughout the level of the workforce, there are more women present. They also hire more women, but they don't disclose much on their benefits, whereas company B does make that public. So although they have, slightly worse performance at the top end, they are making clear that they have benefits in place to support the women throughout the workforce. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do this poll. I'm not sure, Landon, if you can do the poll, because I don't think that I'm able to do it. Which company do you think is company A? Or you can put it in the chat if we don't have poll access. So company A, just to remind you, more women throughout the business, don't really disclose their benefits. They had a slightly better social score and a slightly worse governance score. So yeah, which one do you think is company A? And then obviously company B would be the other one, Louis Vuitton or Under Armour. I'm also not able to see the chat, so maybe if Landon or someone could tell me when there are some answers coming in, and I'll go to the answer and finish it up. Ah, nice, thank you. Cool. So a decent amount of answers coming in. This is actually the best group so far. Normally it's very 50-50, but 80% of you have selected Louis Vuitton as A, which is correct. Louis Vuitton was A and Under Armour was company B. So yeah, thanks very much for listening to that exercise. As I said, the main purpose is to challenge some of your initial perceptions of Louis Vuitton and Under Armour, but I wanted to just use it as a platform to highlight the sort of data that investors are actually looking for, and that companies are beginning to disclose. It also highlights that just because a company is performing really well in one area, such as their social governance or their current workforce dynamics, it doesn't mean that they're completely there or really on top of their gender inclusivity in the workplace specifically. So if you're ready to take action to align with attracting gender-based investments, then those are the sorts of data points and metrics that you need to disclose. And if you are interested in that, then please reach out to myself or my team to stay in the loop as we finalize this model. As I said, we're scoring 3,000 companies based on public data as of, potentially even this evening, maybe tomorrow they'll be coming out. So yeah, if you want to engage with us, learn more about all of that, then please do reach out. I'll type my email in the chat box in just a moment. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that overview, Harry, and looking forward to seeing that data report come out. That will be very interesting. Quite the undertaking. Now, as we get to the end of today's session, we also want to make sure you think about how you can put what you've learned into practice. So with that in mind, we have a Menti question that asks if you could name one activity that you plan to initiate in your organization that could help improve gender equality, what would that be? So Fiona has reshared the Menti link there, and fantastic. So we have the Menti again here. So we already have a few answers, which is great. Mindset change, review policy and objectives on gender equality. Yeah, really good answer. Equal opportunity. Okay, fantastic. We'll give it a few seconds for anyone else. Okay, not seeing anything else pop up, but definitely have a think on that and let that percolate before the next session. And now with the next Menti, let's see how you're feeling in terms of confidence on this topic than before the session began. We always like to see, if folks are, our aim is obviously people learn, take some things away, become more confident. So if you could fill that in. That would be great to see, and we can evaluate. And we're always looking to learn and improve in our sessions as well. Okay, well, I'm going to, Fiona, if you don't mind leaving that up for a few seconds, while I keep chatting, we'll let some folks answer there. Well, meantime, I'll talk a bit about their certificate. So we know this is a big commitment and a lot to learn, and we're very appreciative of all of you who asked questions and interacted throughout the training. So we still have one more session together on the 30th. And if you join us on the 30th, which is a Wednesday, you will get a certificate for your participation in this training workshop. Okay, and not seeing too many more answers come through, so that's all right. I'll switch back to the slides here. Okay. Sorry, tech issue. Fiona, do you mind ending the Menti? I'm not able to. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Cool. Thanks. So yeah, there's the certificate we mentioned. Please, we hope to see you again. In terms of some contacts, we have IFC, ourselves, SSE, as well as UN Women. And oh, fantastic. Thanks for sharing your contact details as well, Harry. And again, thank you to Harry for joining us today. Also, a big thank you to Maya for joining us, as well Vera Gutinger of Swiss Exchange for your time and expertise. It's greatly appreciated. And we also want to say a few words of appreciation. A big thank you to all of our SSE supporters. This group of stock exchanges and organizations committed to promoting sustainable capital markets and has made our training work possible. As a reminder, supporters receive early access to all our training programs. And if you're not a supporter and wish to be, please send us an email. And a big thank you to our partners at IFC, Columbia University, UN Women, and Government of Luxembourg Ministry of Finance, who supported the development of this work, and they made it possible. And lastly, a big thank you to everyone who joined. We hope you had a good session, and we hope to see you again soon. And of course, a huge thank you to our host of the session, the SIX Swiss Exchange. So have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you again on October 30th. Take care.